Hello everyone, welcome back to the Become Alpha podcast. Today we have on Kate Holmes. Kate Holmes is a Kundalini yoga teacher, a Reiki master, a martial arts and personal trainer, a life coach, and a good friend of mine for a few years now. Today on the podcast we're going to be having Kate demonstrate and explain and go through some foundational practices and techniques that you can use, that anyone can use in everyday life to achieve presence and embodiment. Hence, Kate's term, instant practical embodiment, which is what we'll be working on today. I think that there is a lot of information that is going to be crucial today and valuable for anyone who wants to achieve presence, instant presence in their life, instant embodiment. And that's what Kate has to offer us today. So strap on in, get ready for the Become Alpha podcast.
Live from the ATX, your place to get cutting edge info about health and wellness, fitness, business, spirituality, and beyond. Get ready for the Become Alpha podcast.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Become Alpha podcast. Today we have on Kate Holmes. She's gonna show us some practical foundational techniques for achieving embodiment, and that's kind of the first thing we're going to talk about. So I'll hand it over to Kate, and she'll do some explaining. But yeah, go ahead.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. This is my second appearance on the Become Alpha podcast with my very dear friend, Sam Hill. And I love talking with Sam and sitting with Sam because, it hits on all the points, right? Body, mind, spirit, all of these things matter. And what we're talking about today is basically why those things matter, and especially in our changing culture, how we can take these techniques from ancient traditions, specifically yoga we're talking about today, but this applies across martial arts. All different martial arts incorporate these techniques, and basic meditation. So if you're a practitioner of Buddhist meditation or any form of sitting, we are going to talk about those points today, why they're effective, and really why in our culture we need them so desperately right now to help us. So the first point, and my website is instantpracticalembodiment.com. And I chose that name sort of as a tongue-in-cheek, playful way of saying, hey, this is something that you can achieve. Like this is potentially a pop cultural phenomenon. We want to be in this experience. We want to live in this experience and experience it to its fullest and richest potential. And I believe that that is the direction that our generations are moving into, ours and the ones that are coming below. And so we want to provide a framework that is secular and safe, and gives you that instant result. And the result that we're talking about is this idea of embodiment. And we're like, okay, what's embodiment? Right?
Most people aren't going to understand where that lies, I guess.
It's like saying, wellness or health or, these words are big words that we don't necessarily have a framework for. So embodiment, what we're talking about, is the feeling that you get when everything that's going on inside of your body and your mental and emotional experience is in synchronicity.
Yeah.
And when we use the word synchronicity, that again is kind of touching on these sort of, it could go out there forever, right? A long way. So we're really talking about the most practical application of these concepts. And yes, there are esoteric elements, but for the most part, the aspects of yoga that are spiritual, mental, or internal still relate back to the body and how you experience this world in this body that you were given for this lifetime. And that's what we're here to do.
Yeah.
So.
And kind of a lot of the words that we use in this podcast and that we use just in general, a lot of them, like synchronicity and like embodiment, they're kind of big words in the sense that people kind of put their own experience to them, like their own definition almost. It's kind of like what they experience them to be. But the thing about today is that no matter what your experience, no matter what religion you come from, no matter what practice you come from, this goes down to the base level, which is beyond practice. It's beyond all of these things. We do the practice to get to that point, but what's real about it is that it is instant, and that's a big attractant for the modern world as well. Is there's a downside to instant gratification, but this is an instant way to achieve presence. And I think that's probably within the modern world, wanting everything to be instant, instant gratification, the constant stimulation. The instant other side of it is really valuable. So if having constant stimulation all the time, it'd be really great as well to be able to access instant, basically instant destimulation. The other side of it, which is and the practicality of it, because there's just so many complex and complicated methods and methodologies, and this one for me seems to kind of get down to the base level, so that's why I like it.
Well, I mean, everything that you're saying is so on point and so correct and really observant to the nature that our culture and our technology is moving in right now, because it's not just the technology that's moving so quickly. Our brains and our experiences, our neurons are having to learn how to keep up with the pace of the culture and the information that is happening right now. And you're absolutely right. If we can have information at the speed of information itself, we should be able to also turn it off and unplug ourselves with the same immediacy. Because if we're not able to do that, there are 10 million things waiting to distract us from having that experience of presence in our bodies right now, to stop and say, well, how do I really feel, and what do I really want, and how do I filter out all of the constant input in order to be able to tune in to who I really am. Because one of the things that we tend to lose when we're moving too fast is a sense of self-identification. And I'm not talking about necessarily ego identification, because the ego will take whatever serves it and make it part of itself, whether it be a fancy car or more money or sex or whatever that is. But deep, deep, deep down, when you get really still and really quiet and really strong inside yourself, then you're going to start to feel something that connects you to that deep part of yourself, but also to everything that you're experiencing, because none of this is happening in a vacuum. We're all here experiencing this life with each other and with every other molecule that exists in this reality. And there is no point in launching off into an escapist mind game of, I'm going to go out and think about the cosmos, and I'm going to be, the most spiritual person in the world because, all this stuff is materialistic and blah, blah, and kind of play down on what's actually happening. No, better to be here. Be here and be the best thing that you can be, or person, or whatever you are in this reality right now. And that's your starting point. There's always room to grow. And we were kind of talking about in our last podcast this idea of enlightenment. What is enlightenment? And is it achievable for the normal person? Or for the average person? And I think really this is the key. It's the crux of what we're talking about here, because we're not all going to go and sit on a mountaintop and become the isolated master of spirituality. But we can all be at the pinnacle of ourselves in every moment. And sometimes that's a low pinnacle, and sometimes it's a high pinnacle, and sometimes your pinnacle shoots guns at other pinnacles. I mean, it's an evolving thing, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about towards the end. But to start, we're going to do some practical application. We're going to walk through those things and why they're important. Or have a little more discussion, and then at the end we're going to do a nice practical section that in the future you'll be able to skip forward and you can just walk yourself through the practical side of it, so that way you can take something home with you that's palatable. So hopefully you enjoy it. The first thing we're going to talk about is posture. Because when you're experiencing embodiment, the first thing you need to do is accept that you're in this body. So we're going to be in the body and have an experience of the body that is immediate, satisfying, and very real. So this is all primarily from a yogic perspective. Again, as I said, they also address this in martial arts. So if you do any kind of training, Sam does a lot of CrossFit and other kinds of training, and we discuss how these things are relative and similar.
Movement patterns and things like that.
Right. So the first thing, number one key, at the base of the body, you want to keep the hips underneath the shoulders. So you provide the support for your structure. And so you can do this sitting or standing, basically in any kind of vertical posture. Anyone who does any kind of weightlifting knows this to be true. You want to always keep the tailbone tucked. So when you're sitting, you can rock back and forth side to side. If you are like me and you have a generous butt, you might like to pull the butt cheeks apart a little bit. And what you're doing when you rock side to side is finding a center point of balance between the left and right. So wherever that is. And once you find the center of that, left to right, then we're going to rock forward and back and feel the center of balance along that axis. So there's basically a cross. And the center of the cross is your perineum. And for those who don't know, the perineum is between the sexual organs and the anus. So we're going to get really literal. Sorry. Hope you're not uncomfortable with being really literal. But these are the things we have to talk about in order to accept the fact that, we're in these bodies. Like, sometimes it's weird and gross to be in a body. And uncomfortable.
That's one of the, one of the things I've been going through recently is the uncomfortability of just being a body, being a human being. There's so many weird things going on in your body that usually, because of our world of constant stimulation, we don't ever really attend to and think about things like, like posture in some way.
Absolutely, and you are speaking my song right now, because I am about 8 months pregnant, and there is nothing that is comfortable when you're 8 months pregnant. And that is just part of the human experience. And when you accept doing the best that you can with posture, with breathing, with being aware, and quit escaping the fact that you're in a body, because that's so much, like you're saying, so much of the distraction exists so that we don't have to experience the uncomfortableness of the body.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's the right word, but orthorexy, is that the right word? No, there is some kind of word, kind of like what you were talking about when people do escapism things and, like, go up on mountains and, isolate themselves, which have, their benefit, of course. But whenever you do that, instead of saying, nope, I'm here right now in this weird body thing, this weird vehicle that's going around that, has all these weird processes in it, instead of saying that, it's much... it's much easier, it sounds nicer to think of something else, or to have something else as a distraction, to be like, no, that's not true. You know, I can think of it in this way, but instead grounding yourself and really confronting your humanness is, you know, to me, one of the most valuable things I've been dealing with recently.
And grounding is what we're talking about right now, with the way that you sit and stand and the way that you relate to the earth. And all of this is done by pointing the perineum down to the center of the gravity of the earth. And so you can think of it almost like there's a bell weight that's hanging from the perineum. And what that's going to do for you is give you a center balance point. So if you're not sure, practice rocking left to right, practice rocking forward to back, and you can also kind of do a circle. Just make sure that you don't overextend too much if you're not used to doing this. In yoga, we call these Sufi grinds, but basically you're doing a rotation that's right over that central axis. And then whenever you're doing work like this, you always go both directions, try in equal numbers, right? But that's just to give you that feeling of, hey, like I'm connected, I'm here. The root of my body, which we equate to the first chakra, the root chakra, when we're talking about the more esoteric side of yoga, which is seated right around the perineum or a little bit lower depending on who you talk to, is how we root and connect to the earth, which is where we get our power and our energy from. So if you're someone who trains martial arts or does any kind of physical fitness, you know that without a solid base from feet to knees to hips, you're not going to have the support and structure that you need in order to do all the work and the movements that are in the upper body. And we as a nation tend to carry a lot of our work and our stress in our upper body because we are not connected fully into the lower body. So a lot of the issues, like, you know, the stand that's so popular now for the potty, the toilet stand, right?
Yeah.
They're like, oh, squat, because
potty.
Yeah, because squatting is actually better for you, you know, to go to the bathroom. And they're finding, like, oh, all these people, indigenous people, like, they squat and they're so much healthier. And look at Americans, and, like, we're all screwed up and our intestines are screwed up. And, well, it's really because we're so disconnected, you know, from the lower part of our body. We don't really even know how it works. Yeah. So,
and usually in those indigenous tribes, usually they're actually on the physical earth, too.
Correct.
Like, whenever they're going to the bathroom, they're squatting over earth.
Right, and they sit on the ground. They don't sit in chairs.
Exactly.
So a little bit of a sidebar there, but so now what we're going to do is we're going to bring that stability from the ground up. So what you want to do is imagine that you've got a point of balance that extends all the way up through the crown of the head. So imagine that you could place the crown of the head right above the perineum. And sometimes people say sit with a straight spine. The spine is not straight. The spine has a natural S-curve to it, so you don't necessarily want to think about sitting straight. But what you do want to do is sit up nice and tall. And I like to think of it as if there's a cord that's pulling from the crown of the head, which is right at the top of the head. There's a bony protrusion, and you can feel it with your finger. And that's what we refer to when we talk about the crown. And if you position that right above the perineum and pull up like an imaginary string and pull down from the perineum like an imaginary weight, what's going to happen is you're going to start elongating the spine. And when you start to elongate the spine, you create a little bit of space between each vertebrae. And one of the issues of posture that we have in our culture is that the spine becomes compressed. And the spine becomes compressed because of poor sitting, poor standing, and poor posture, especially in the upper body. So as you're inhaling and exhaling, just imagine that you have this sort of tension that's pulling up through the crown and down from the perineum. As you're breathing, you can visualize, if you're comfortable with visualization, a little bit of space between every vertebrae. And what you want to do, and this is something I didn't learn until I started getting into yoga a lot, is tuck the chin slightly. And so we're really only talking about maybe 30%. What that does for you is it elongates the little tiny vertebrae right in the back of the neck. And this is where a lot of people carry a lot of tension, is in the neck and shoulders. So we're tucking the chin slightly. We're letting the perineum point to the center of the earth with the hips slightly tucked, sitting at the exact center of that cross in the lower body. Placing the crown of the head right above the perineum. Chin is slightly tucked, and inhaling and exhaling right here. And as we're doing this, we're going to start to feel tension and pain in the body. It's not very comfortable if you have terrible posture and have had terrible posture for a while. It's not comfortable to sit properly because it's not habituated. Your body is going to fall back into a habitual pattern. So one thing that a lot of people struggle with is a poor shoulder, issues in the shoulder girdle and in the ribs. And so we have collapsed breathing. And part of the reason why we have collapsed breathing is because we breathe from up here. And so now we're going to talk about the yogic breath, which is a 3-part breath. So we're inhaling, and as we're inhaling, it goes 1, lower belly, 2, mid-belly diaphragm, and 3, into the upper chest and lungs. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, maybe, if you've never experienced this type of breath before. But when you inhale, you're actually going to visualize the breath beginning in the lower belly and the sacrum. And then it will open up. Second stage will open up the diaphragm, which pulls down on the bottom ribs. And third stage lets the ribs open and expand and fill the lungs to capacity. And then when you exhale, it's the same thing. You're going to release from the lower 1, then release and let the diaphragm start to commit. And then you'll start to feel, rather than think about the ribs and lungs contracting, think about relaxing the upper body. And this is something that you can train yourself to see, so that you can actually see when someone's having anxiety, because you'll see their upper body start to tense and freak out. And what's happening is that they're actually limiting their capacity. And they're limiting their capacity. I mean, you can say that in a sort of like esoteric, oh, you're limiting your capacity. No, you're really not getting a full breath. That's the problem. You're not actually breathing. So 1, inhale, bring the breath all the way down to the base of the body. 2, let it come up, let the diaphragm drop down. And 3, fill the lungs and chest. And you should feel the rib cage expanding 360 degrees, because as you're inhaling, your ribs actually expand in the back as well as in the front. So we're going to go over this more later, more practical step-by-step way, but just to kind of get you over the hurdle, if you've never heard anybody talk about this before, that the breath isn't just from here up. And it's certainly not in the neck and shoulders, which is where we have a tendency to breathe, right?
Yeah, like a lot of the time, I remember I used to do it only until I started actually paying attention to my breath, that I would breathe like this with my shoulders. And it was almost like this pattern, and it's because a lot to do with stress, because like you were talking about earlier, our first response is this. And body movement also relates to fighting. Mm-hmm. This is the position where you can block things with your shoulder. So that's a fighting position, because your body goes into that fighting mode where you're basically closing off from things. And that's one of the first things I noticed, is to relax my shoulders. It took a lot of like getting over old patterns. And just from doing those breaths, I feel better now.
Just letting you know.
Yay.
Yes.
And that's why we call it instant practical embodiment.
It really does work to pay attention, but yeah.
And so paying attention, thank you, Sam. We can segue in a little bit from this, and we're going to talk a little bit more about breathing and the different types of breathing again. But we're just going to touch briefly on eye focus, because as we're sitting and applying our attention, so attention is a couple of things. Attention is what you think, and it's also where you look. And if you are focusing your attention in a very specific way for a particular reason, then you're also focusing your mental attention on a particular goal. And so I teach Kundalini Yoga, and I have studied almost every religion that there is. I also train martial arts, and I can tell you with certainty that where you're looking will affect your perspective. So we use in Kundalini Yoga, they're called dristis. I mean, not just in Kundalini Yoga. In yoga, there's a concept called a dristi, and that is the eye focus. And there's several different types of eye focus. When you're using a meditation, you can focus on the tip of the nose. You can focus at the third eye point. You can focus on a point about 6 inches out from the nose. You can have a mudra, and your drishti is focused on the mudra. There's also gazing. So if you're doing a meditation that uses a portrait, like of your guru or of a god, a deity, or Jesus or something like that, you gaze into the eyes of the master. And that's a whole other kind of drishti. But for our purposes today, we're going to keep it very simple and very practical, because that's the whole goal. And we're just focusing on the drishti that activates the pineal gland and pituitary gland. And that is to gaze at the third eye point with the eyes relaxed and closed. So if your eyes were not closed, it would essentially look like you were slightly cross-eyed, because I'm looking up and through the point on my brow where my brow line would meet if I had a unibrow. There's a little triangle right here, and some refer to it as the third eye. If you're not into esoterics, none of that stuff really matters to you. What matters is how you feel. Does it make you feel better? And when you gaze through that point, what you're actually doing when you slightly cross the eyes is you're activating the nerve that sits directly behind the eyes, which is in a cross shape. So you can see some patterns coming through here of cross shapes. Right?
My eyes are actually twitching.
Your eyes will get tired, for sure. Especially if you're not used to doing it. With any practice that you do, you're rewriting your neural makeup. So you're actually, through your conscious application of your attention and your awareness, you are physically recreating yourself. So in that, it's one of those things where if you have a really scientific mind, you might balk at that immediately and just say, that's law of attraction stuff, that's woo-woo stuff that's out there. No, it's really not, because they've proven that applied attention and focus and cognitive restructuring actually will help with addiction therapy, with depression, with anxiety. I mean, they're proving this all across the psychological medical field right now. So when you're doing a practice, when you're starting a practice, it's really important not to overdo it, because what's going to happen is you're going to try too hard, you're going to get frustrated, you're going to burn out, and then you're not going to do it anymore, because you're going to be able to say, oh, it didn't work, like I tried hard and it gave me a headache, or my eyes started twitching, or like my leg fell asleep, or oh, my butt hurts because I sat too long. No. Start very small. Start with 5 minutes. After a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, bump it up to 10 minutes. Take it in small chunks. If you're the type of person who really has to spend a lot of time with something, then give it that time. If you're someone who gets really habituated and stuck in your patterns, even if you don't think you are, you probably are, because that's how we work, that's how our brains work. We have an electrical impulse that communicates across a gap inside the brain, and it sends energy and information. And what happens is that that network gets habituated, and it's a pattern. And that whatever it is that you're doing, whatever negative behavior or habit that you want to change, it has some kind of positive reinforcement inside your brain that sends a positive chemical every time you do that habit, even if you don't like it, like smoking a cigarette. You might not like smoking a cigarette, but every time you do it, your brain tells you it feels good. So it makes it that much harder to stop doing the thing, even though you really don't want to, but your brain keeps telling you it's good. And so one thing that we're doing with this practice is entrenching the feeling of feeling good right away for about 5 minutes. 5 minutes a day. So we won't get into the pituitary gland and pineal gland too much today. But I will say and just touch on, and if you have questions about this, you can either email me or email Sam, and we can help get you more information. You can also Google search this. The pineal gland is a teeny tiny gland that sits right beneath the crown of the head, right beneath this point, and right in the middle of the cross of your head. And to be literal, no one knows what the pineal gland does scientifically. Yogis have known for millennia that the pineal gland is what you need to access higher states of consciousness, to connect to the divine, connect to the Godhead. You need the pineal gland. Almost everyone in Western culture has a calcified pineal gland. And what that means basically is that certain functions that our body should naturally be capable of, we are cut off from those things. And there's a reason why, partially because we live in this very materialistic world. And if you had a bunch of people running around having all these visions and, seeing things that weren't there and all this stuff, then it would cause chaos. And some of that is happening right now, especially with people who experiment with psychedelic drugs, people who have Kundalini spontaneously activate, their pineal gland will just spontaneously decalcify, and they end up with drug-induced psychosis. They end up with schizophrenia, or something that looks like schizophrenia, and they end up being treated by the medical complex because we don't have a language and an architecture in our culture that appropriately deals with this. So having a calcified pineal gland actually is protecting us from things that we're not quite ready to deal with yet. But getting to that stage is part of what this work is about. Learning how to feel in the body, learning how to experience things as they are right now, both in the larger environment and also for you, inside your body and inside your life. Because these techniques are going to give you the pace and the patience to be able to deal with the things as they come up. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that practicing yoga is going to cure cancer or heal your broken arm or anything, outlandish like that. People do have profound miracle experiences, but I would be a fool to have any kind of claim like that. But I will tell you that...
Yeah, a little disclaimer at the bottom of the video. This will not treat or cure any diseases you have.
But I will tell you that...
It can. You never know.
I suffered intensely from anxiety and depression through most of my life. And spent much of my life seeking and searching for the meaning of life, first of all, which is a huge, huge question that no one really can answer. Surprise. And the other thing is to just stop feeling bad, because I felt bad all the time. I felt bad in my body. I felt bad in my mind. I felt bad. I was one of those people that you would see and you would just say, oh, she's just miserable. Because everything that I saw and experienced was negative, because I was miserable. And it wasn't until I found this practice and found out, how to feel in the body, how to be patient, and ultimately how to become neutral. And we're going to talk about that too.
Yeah.
That I really started to find that sense of peace.
Yeah.
So.
One of the things I wanted to say, because you mentioned it earlier, and a lot of this has to do with, as well, I think one other video that I did a long time ago, but that there are latent things, just like in the pineal gland. It's like a latent organ, kind of like the appendix, or something like that. The pineal gland has latent functions in it. Our bodies, our genes, we have become, in a sense, desensitized and devolved from certain innate human qualities and faculties that at one point in time we did have when we were in a different environment that was maybe more open and more, I guess, accepting, because a lot of it has to do with the environment that we live in. Our bodies have, especially with the autonomic nervous system and, just our nervous system in general, our stress response, all of those things, our body knows what's best for us to a certain extent. And so that's why the calcification, latent genes, latent access points, that's why they are now calcified, or that's why they are now kind of like there's an armor over them, because if we did have access to them, our body knows there would be a response from the environment that would ultimately be detrimental. But this is like a tool for regaining that access point, kind of like reestablishing the connection to those latent abilities, latent qualities, latent connection points. And that's as well one of the things that you're going into completely, is where you came into this on Kundalini yoga, and I came into this on like bioenergetics and like somatic therapies and things like that. Similar, definitely different, but one of the things, the first things in energetics is posture, because posture gives way, enables your spine, your nervous system, all of your nerves to work properly, and then that in turn enables all the other functions to work properly, and it kind of goes from literally the ground up, which is posture, from the ground. Yep. Because even when you're standing, what are you standing on? You're standing on a surface, ground, the grounding place, and then from there goes up into posture, and then into your functions, into your, and you can call them a lot of things, but like in esoterics, it's chakras, or you could just say energy points, or you could specifically go into the organs associated with the root, sexual organs / like those bones and particular points as well. It goes into all different levels, which is what I love about it, is that each one of them has like a piece of the pie. Mm-hmm. And it's really cool because no matter what, even if you go into it from a standpoint of chakras, you're still right. You're still right. Even if you think that's woo-woo, okay, from a scientific standpoint, you just use different words. Like they mean the same thing, and that was really interesting to me, is that it gives way for all the other processes to happen, to be optimal, to be, functional, which it was almost like it's so simple. It's just like posture, breathing, because breathing oxygenates your body, Of course, the reason why we usually have pretty slow, low grade breathing most of the day when we're not thinking about it. In turn, you can't have too much oxygen, but that's why we have a limited attention to it, and that's how we affect it, is we kind of optimize the oxygen to our bodies, because most of the time, low level state, while we're doing other functions, but it's really awesome. And then from there, it goes into all of the other things, like it kind of like, you'll probably mention it, but the toroidal thing. So from the ground up, it goes up and then out into the environment, and it's like this incredible feedback loop. It's so cool. It's so amazing.
Yeah. So from a yogic perspective, what you're talking about, we refer to as the aura, and the toroidal field, the donut that is created through the chakras as it relates to the aura, is essentially your personal electromagnetic field. Every single thing that, even down to molecules, have some type of polarity of electromagnetic quality. And so this isn't such a, our science hasn't quite gotten there yet, but it is now. There are people who are researching this right now. This is a cutting edge technological, scientific, spiritual crossover thing that's actually happening in our lifetime, which is super exciting. And it makes what we're talking about that much more relevant and that much more exciting, because this isn't just, something that people are doing in a lab or something that people are doing in an ashram. This is something that is we're learning is part of the experience of being corporeal form. And being in a human body specifically, that we are upright, that we are able to align our hip girdle below our shoulder girdle and create this polarizing field of alignment through, in yoga we call it the Shushmana. It's the central channel, and it is equivalent to the spinal cord. It's not the spinal cord, but for visualization purposes, some people like to think of it as a spinal cord, but it is the central channel, which runs energetically from the top to the bottom and through the crown of the head and out down through the perineum. So even though we're talking about practical things like posture and structures and optimal functioning and all that stuff, all of that is also true, very much true and very much important. But we're also talking about the spiritual psychosomatic implications of having that optimal structure and becoming, and this is getting way esoteric if you're interested, this is how you learn how to become a manifestation engine to create the experiences, even if it's just mentally through your perspective. We see what we want to see. We have the experiences that support our worldview, because we'll just block out anything that's not supporting our worldview, especially if you lean from one extreme or the other. And part of what we're doing right now is finding a neutral space by accessing the Shushmana, which gets that whole engine working in harmony with itself. And once you start working in harmony with your own physicality, your own biometrics, your own spirituality, your own thoughts, your emotions, once you yourself have reached a sort of homeostasis with all the things that are going on and all the input that's coming through, then your ability to interface in a positive and successful way with the rest of reality is going to, I myself personally have experienced what I would call miracles. I don't necessarily assign myself to a particular religion or anything like that, but I can say with certainty that I have sat in absolute awe of the universe and the things that happen sometimes. And it's nothing that I've necessarily created. Maybe I projected positive energy into something, and who knows? I don't know.
Manifestation engine is a good word.
And really, it's about whether you subscribe to personal creationism or the secret or the law of attraction, whether you believe in any of that stuff.
The secret.
Whether you believe in it or whether you think it's hooey, with certainty, your attitude affects your environment. So if you can get yourself to a place where not even necessarily positive, but neutral, to say, you know, what comes, what doesn't come, I'm still me, I'm here, I'm in this life, and this is it.
I'm still accessing this body.
And as long as I'm here, there's more to do, there's more to experience, there's more work to be done, there's more pleasure to have. And that is when you kind of hit this sweet spot, or you're in a flow with creation, with reality, where you can encounter people with whom you disagree, and you can still come away with a positive experience, and maybe you can even help them to broaden their own experience by not taking a position of confrontation with them.
Yeah.
And that is the real yogic art. When you meet a yogic master, it's not the asana, it's not the pranayama, which is the breathing. You know, it's not necessarily any of that stuff that makes you feel like this person is a master. It's we call it the radiant body. It's literally the way that they create the space around them, where you just feel like as soon as you come within 25 feet of this person, you feel like you're being hugged by someone who actually loves you.
Yeah.
And they don't even necessarily know you, and you don't necessarily know them.
Yeah.
But
there's an energy about them.
There's an energy. It's different. Yeah. And you can feel it.
Because in the process of opening these things, you know, in the body, in terms of, you know, body awareness and things like that, they are, the strength of their field, the electromagnetic field, is probably why you feel that way as well, just intuitively from my perspective. It's probably why you feel that way, because most people have that armor. So when you come up to them, it probably takes longer for you to feel them out, and it probably is like, okay, like they're hard to read, or you don't get their energy because they're holding on to it. And people who don't, you know what's going on. You know what's happening. You know if they have what kind of output they have, and that whenever you meet one of those masters, they have incredibly strong field, and you feel different. It affects you in a certain way. It feels different than most people. I can say. I was going to say something, but I forgot. It's whatever.
Well, and it's a little bit of a sidebar too, but if you're someone who's watching this and you are a seeker and someone who's searching for answers and looking for some kind of solution to your suffering or your pain, you can know with almost 100% certainty that any teacher that tries to offer you a solution like that is a charlatan, because there is no suffering. There is no solution to suffering. There also is technically no suffering, but that is a very philosophical perspective, and it doesn't really change the fact that you don't feel good, right? The only way that you feel better is through your own work and through your own development, and really that comes from finding neutrality. Because it's only when you're vacillating between extremes of good and bad, pain and pleasure, when you go between those extremes, that is when you experience suffering. When you experience suffering, you're caught in the duality, which is the illusion of life. And the reason why you feel so peaceful around masters is because they have accepted the fact that as long as you are experiencing duality and you're caught in the illusion of life, you're going to suffer. And they've been able to hone their ability and their practice to the point where they're able to live in a constant experience of neutrality. And in Kundalini Yoga and Kriya Yoga, we have a word for it. It's called shunya. And basically what that means is 0 point. So the 0 point is where you say, you know, everything that is, and everything that isn't. And it's a place beyond thought, it's a place beyond emotion, It's a place beyond everything. And that is the goal of meditation. And yeah, I mean, if you go to a meditation teacher, one of the first things they're going to tell you is stop trying to turn off your thoughts. Don't try to turn off your mind. Don't try to avoid emotion. And any good meditation teacher will tell you this, because the thing that happens is...
It's the hardest thing to do, too.
Because the thing that happens, as soon as you sit and are still, everything that you've been running from through all these distractions, whether it be Netflix, your phone, work, kids, yada, 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 all the stuff that exists to distract you from being in your experience, all that stuff just is like, oh, now you have time for me. Now you have time for that time that you felt bad when you were 5, and now you have time for, this deep maw of depression that you've been running from through all these distractions, thinking that you can pick up identity from all these things that you do and all these commitments that you've made. And that's when you really start confronting your ego, and it can be extremely painful. One of the things that's coming through right now in a lot of light worker, spiritual work kind of things, I follow a lot of different people who do this type of work, and the thing that they're focusing on the most right now is what we're calling shadow work, or the reality of spiritual work and growth. And the reality, because somewhere along the way, pop culture took all these nice spiritual things that we're doing and tried to isolate it and be like, oh, like, don't harsh my vibe, like, oh, I only want to experience things that are positive, and oh, I believe in the law of attraction, so I'm not going to look at things that make me uncomfortable or make me feel negative. Look at our world. Our world is sick, and I'm not saying that from a place of judgment or a place of negativity. I'm saying that from the observation of a neutral mind. Our world and our experience of it is sick, and if we continue the way that we're continuing, something bad could happen. Our earth can't really support the way that we've been living, and what we need to do is we need to wake the fuck up. And I'm sorry to use profanity on your podcast, Sam, but
we invite profanity.
This is something that like every single person that's alive should care about this, because if we don't step up to the fact that this is the only experience that we have, we're gonna waste it. We're gonna waste our time. We're gonna waste all of the joy and pleasure and experience that we have right now. And it's not about, giving up a pleasurable life. It's not about, giving up your family or your kids or going on that date with that crazy guy who was super hot but ended up being nuts or whatever. You don't have to stop doing any of those things.
Right.
But you do need to realize, if you want to be truly happy, healthy, and holy, you need to realize that, this is the only dance there is, the one we're in right now. And for those of you who know, I'm referencing Ram Dass a lot because...
that's a book you wrote, actually.
It is a book he wrote. And that book, The Only Dance There Is, and then the other one, Be Here Now. And those two books, what we're doing right now is the work that was started long time ago.
Yeah.
In America, this work started more or less in the 60s. In India, this work has been ongoing. And now
for a long time.
The spiritual focus of the earth shifted from India to America. And there's some history there I won't go into right now. If you're interested, you can definitely reach out to me. But the spiritual focus of the world right now is in America. And if you look at what's happening in our culture, you can see this pain of suffering, of lack of awareness. And part of the reason why the suffering is happening is because so many people don't want to look at the darkness that exists in our culture and own it for what it is and say, you know what? I created that. I didn't vote on that issue, or I didn't get involved. I didn't talk to my neighbors. I don't even know my neighbors. Of course it's my fault. We've lost a sense of our community. We've lost a sense of common unity in our culture. And so things are falling apart. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult to say...
Very dystopian.
It is.
It can be, at least.
It can be. It can be. But the reality of it is that there is an answer, there's a key, and that key lies in perfecting our experience of ourselves. And when I say perfecting, I'm not saying become perfect, because as long as you're alive, you will never be perfect. There's always going to be something you can do, some improvement.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that have a perfectly realistic experience. Be perfectly and completely here. Maybe not in every single moment. We all have our Netflix binge times.
Oh yeah.
But, you know, be present. You know, awareness, the awareness that we have, that we can manifest, is our most precious gift. And to squander it by, you know, constantly being a consumer of data, of games, of shows, of politics, whatever it is, you know, constantly being a consumer and using your awareness only to feed your sense of emptiness is true gluttony. You know, it's wasteful.
That's why it was, you know, one of the deadly sins was gluttony, and not. That goes into, like, you know, self-judgment and self-hatred, but one of the things about manifestation that I go into quite often is that, and this is one of also just like the intersecting points, and the reason why I think that, well, I experienced what Kate is bringing to us as being practical is because she and I came to it and we're not talking about it at the time. Like, both of us came to this separate of each other in the process, but came to a point that was very similar. In one of my videos, I talk about how to get intention into attention into manifestation, which is one of the foundational parts of what you were talking about, the manifestation engine, because where it starts is intention, or the inner consciousness, and usually I say the inside tension, like on a tightrope, like the tension of awareness, and then the inner tension, and then that goes out into the attention, where the attention is at, so out here, and that is where you focus that attention. Like we were talking about, the awareness factor of becoming aware of your body, you literally put your consciousness into your body. You literally put it, whenever you look at your hands, you're putting your consciousness there physically, and then also what you see, it's there. And because of all these distractions, we have no idea what's going on. And me and my friend Julian, I've had him on, we call them dead zones. There's places inside the body and outside the body where you don't pay attention to. And there are these little dead zones where they're just, you haven't put your awareness there, and you've been kind of putting it off in the corner. It's like that space you never clean up in your house, and it like becomes horrible, and you know you should clean it, but you just put things in front of it, like and that's what we call it. We call it a dead zone, because that's what it is. And people and I figured out that the root was a dead zone for me until I came and did a session with you, is that they're all different parts of your body and all different parts of the environment. You know, not cleaning something in your house is like one instance or manifestation of it, but you have so many places in your body that you don't put your consciousness to, that you don't put your awareness on and think it, because where you put your awareness is probably the most important thing. The reason why someone looks at their phone more than they pay attention to their breath is because of their awareness, because of where they put their consciousness. Because they go, my intention is to pay, like paying someone, pay attention to this phone. My intention is to pay attention to the phone. So that it goes into this feedback loop where you know, and I was in this position. Whenever I'm speaking on these things, and I think both of us have this, we speak on experience, and that's the most important thing, is your experience. And with this, as well, is your awareness and your attention, which is always probably the biggest factor in your awareness of what's happening and where you put your attention, is how grounded you are. And that's also the importance, is because if you're super stressed, you know, if there are all these different factors overwhelming you, it's going to be much more difficult to focus on grounding, you know, to focus on things that are going to keep you in that neutral state. So that's why, again, it's so important to do this grounding breathing work, is because it gives you the platform, like the structure for reaching out and having inner strength for accessing all different kinds of things in life in general.
Absolutely, you're 100% right, and I couldn't have said it any better. And you're right about, you know, experience. What we experience and how we convey that experience is the most important thing for this time period, because if you do any research into the Aquarian age, and again, this is kind of tripping over into sort of more woo-woo, esoteric, yogic stuff. But so the Earth goes through the procession of equinoxes, and we're now in the stage of Aquarius, and Aquarius is the time that information is pervasive. So you can go on your phone and literally look up information about absolutely anything in the entire existence of the world that existed, that's available. And you have all that information at your disposal. But it's the experience that gives you the wisdom of the information that makes you able to teach from that experience and actually use it in a constructive manner. So without the experience of self and that internal education that you do for yourself to give you that experience, you're not going to have the wisdom, knowledge, and capacity to do anything useful with it. And, you know, just as another point, a side point to what you're saying, you know, I also follow a lot of, you know, financial gurus and marketing people and people who do self-work of all different kinds. Like Gary Vaynerchuk is a great guy. I love his work, but he is someone who is very busy, very high, like his energetic level is very high. And he says, you know, the number one thing that you're going to get if you're successful in marketing and advertising is you're going to get people's attention. And you have to go to where people's attention is, which, by the way, is right here in their phone. So it's all about, you know, Facebook videos and how to sell things through video ads and, you know, a whole plethora of ways to capture the attention, because it's the attention that's key. As long as someone has your attention, they have power over you. And when you take your attention and use your intention to take your attention into your body and start experiencing all of those pieces of yourself. And I love that, dead zones. I love that because it's so true, and that happens inside our minds, it happens inside our bodies, it happens inside our relationships.
All the levels.
All the levels. You know, and that's one thing that we're really, you could not in 10 lifetimes touch on every aspect of all the information of things that are available that reference this subject, like feng shui. I mean, you brought up feng shui, and it almost indirectly. You know, things in your house that affect how you experience yourself in your life. That's what feng shui is. Yeah.
Once you go into environment, it opens up all different things.
But so what we do to keep it real simple is focus just on this first.
And it's not even simple just because you're stupid. It's, or, you know, just to keep it simple because, you know, people have too much to think about. It's because of that, because we can say environment, we can say intention, we can say all of these things, but what they do is they open up experiential pathways within you. So when you start doing them, each one of them opens up infinite things for you as they do for me. So for us to explain them completely for you in all these ways, putting them simple leaves the experience up to you.
Yeah.
So, and that's probably the most important part of that,
and
keeping it simple.
As you know, just as well as I do, you can fall down an intellectual rabbit hole for the rest of your lifetimes. If you believe in reincarnation, you can go in there for eternity.
For ebbs.
Researching topics, finding connections, thinking you've discovered something profound, which you maybe have, but really it comes back to, and I struggle with this too, before I found Kundalini Yoga, I spent so much time in research and oh, this is cool, and this is like this, and ooh, all these things. And thinking that I really knew something, thinking that I had some edge on everybody else. When in reality, I was so suffering, ego suffering, beyond anything you could imagine. Because it was mine, and I have to own that now and realize, like, hey, I still have a lot of work to do. Okay.
Yeah.
But this is sort of the beginning steps, and that was one of the things that intellectually is kind of hard at first to say to yourself. This much. Baby steps.
Yeah.
Start with posture. Learn how to feel what good posture feels like. Learn how to habituate it 5 minutes a day. Then breathing. Master a breath. Master the 3-part breath. From there, there's all kinds of breath that you can do. But really, it's about having that experience inside the body and knowing what that feels like and mastering that. Because once you master yourself, everything else gets easier.
Yeah.
Instantly.
Yeah.
Instantly.
And as well with breathing, there's probably there's probably infinite ways you could breathe as well. So one of the best things for keeping it simple, for just mastering one at a time, just master the 3-part breath. You could even start simpler and say that, just deep inhalations and exhalations, and then move to the 3-part breath, because each one of them opens up a little Pandora's box. Like just focusing on the root brings up so many things, and brings up muscle memory that hasn't ever been used. It brings up the dead zones, and you're like, oh, there's a bunch of dead shit. Like I haven't even paid attention to this. Like, oh, and the part about it is as well with kind of like taking care of a yard, which is something that I don't do very well yet. But there were parts of the yard that like weren't paid attention to, and they were dead. So what you have to do, you have to put your consciousness there. You have to, give it water and what it needs. Like, give it, water, sunlight, all those things. And give it attention. Like, give it love, basically. Mm-hmm. That's what a green thumb is for taking care of dead plants, dead zones, dead things. But, yeah, so that's why keeping it simple is really good, because especially with all of the access we have with technology, which is a blessing and a gift, there's just so much. So if you look up breathing techniques, it's going to show you 50. It's going to be like, oh yeah, you can do, hypoxic breathing, you can do all these different things, and it's like, okay, you're going to overwhelm yourself. You're not going to master any of them. Yeah, if you started at one, you could master that, move on, and then, go back around to it. But
yeah, the goal really being to find some mastery in small things. And to start foundationally. That's one area that we have a tendency to fail so much, because we get so fast and so busy and so caught up in our own intellectualism that we forget to do the foundational work, which is actually really boring.
Yeah.
My martial arts instructor says all the time, get really, really good at 3 things that you like. A punch, a kick, an elbow.
Yeah.
Master that. Practice that. There's a quote by Bruce Lee. I don't fear a man who's practiced 10,000 kicks, but I fear a man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times.
Yeah.
And that's some foundational stuff that, once you do something so often that it becomes part of who you are, part of your experience every day, then you can build on that and get into more esoteric things, and you can develop other forms of breathing. You can find some master somewhere that has some technique that you've never heard of before. But until you start to really feel into those places where you're hiding from yourself, where you're running from yourself, where you're not embracing who you are, whether it be physically, mentally, or spiritually, there's going to be some hang up or hiccup that you're going to be carrying around with you everywhere you go. Every experience that you have is going to be colored by this thing that you don't want to deal with, this shadow, as it were.
And that's the shadow work.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the ways that we kind of frame this is by talking about this concept of duality. And we've touched on it in a sort of roundabout way throughout this conversation. But really duality boils down to, a life of extremism, a life of black and white, and seeing things either as yes or no, or good or bad, or making the division between male and female, either for yourself personally or culturally. You can every single thing that exists that's true has an aspect of duality.
Yeah.
So light and dark, black and white, feminine and masculine. When we're talking about those energetically, we're talking about receiving and giving. Those duality points can never be separated. And that's where we fail oftentimes, and where we get caught up in our culture when we sit with someone and say, when you realize that someone sits on the opposite side of a fence from you, ideologically or philosophically or politically, we find it easy to keep that division and say, you and I are now different. You and I are now not the same.
Yeah.
Instead of recognizing that, hey, we're just two sides of an argument. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because two sides of an argument can find a very beautiful neutral ground. Yeah. And I would love to see our culture be able to find a neutral ground of how to deal with our gun issue in America and our violence issue. I mean, can you imagine?
That's only one of them.
That's only one of them. Yeah. And I bring it up only because it's so relevant in this moment. Yep. But it can be anything. It can be, do you think Trump is good or bad president? Do you think that it doesn't matter really what it is. It's whether or not we have the ability to see both sides and recognize that the best way to come to a solution is to marry those sides and find neutrality. Yep. Jesus himself said, find the middle way, find the middle path. And in Kabbalah, the point of the Kabbalah is to find that middle path.
The middle ground between the two extremes. That actually goes into the last one, at the lodge. The Kabbalah is a big part of Masonry, actually. The middle path between the two extremes of life and the duality, which is interesting.
So in yoga, there is actually an energetically, physically relevant manifestation of this pattern. And it's the duality, and it's also the Trinity. And so we talked about the Shushmana, which is the central channel. But there's also the Ida and the Pingala. And the Ida is the feminine channel, which is the receiving channel, which is the moon side. And the Pingala is the right side, which is the sending side, the masculine side, and the sun side. And those two they intertwine through the body around the Shushmana. And they also relate to the nostrils. So the left nostril relates to the Ida, and the right nostril relates to the Pingala, and it also relates to the hemispheres of the brain. So when you're doing the 3-part breath and your eye gaze is focused through the third eye point, you're actually creating communication between the left and right hemispheres of the brain across the corpus callosum, which is a deep groove that runs the full length of the brain. So really, even though these concepts seem out there and esoteric, and you can have intellectual discourse about these things and all this stuff, we're actually talking about something that is very, very, very real and practical inside the body that you can experience as soon as you start breathing and putting your attention to it. And I know it's hard sometimes to look at the world and see the way that it is, and see the suffering of the world, and say, like, where is God? Where is our Savior? Where is, the person or the entity or the government or whomever that's going to save us from the suffering? And it's one of the hardest things to realize that, hey, Sam, there's not much that you can do about all the suffering of the world. But there is something that you can do right now about your own suffering.
I know Mother Teresa, that's for sure. Well, and another thing about that I automatically think of is, if you don't have yourself down, you're not going to be able to extend out and help other people in suffering. If you don't have this aspect, I kind of relate to it as people like Oprah and like, Mother Teresa and kind of all these people, they're always put on these huge totems. And what people need to know is if you don't have your stuff down, it's just going to be from the ego.
Absolutely.
It's just going to be purely, I'm doing this because it makes me feel like them. It makes me feel good. But the only reason, look at Oprah's childhood. Look at how much suffering she had to endure, and I imagine the same for Mother Teresa. They have their shit together.
She still has been enduring suffering all through her fame, her celebrity, her wealth. She has struggled with weight. Her struggle has been to a degree public, and so we like to think that these people have it together because they have XYZ and they have this and that. But in reality, all of that stuff is just a poor substitute for feeling good in your body. And once you have that, and that's kind of what I was talking about with the concept of miracles, once you start to feel good and you start to flow with your environment and within your relationships, it will feel like magic. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be, there's no alchemy beyond your personal alchemy that you're doing inside your body. It's not witchcraft. It's not religious. It's not anything like that. It is the most realistic, the most practical, the most simple thing that you can do to not only improve your life and your experience, but also to make the world a better place. Because as soon as you start to do that stuff for yourself, you start projecting that type of energy into
like
the world.
The radiance you were talking about.
And you also stop perpetuating negativity and stop perpetuating intellectual and emotional violence into the world. And even though that's something that's a little bit, it's not as tangible. Just because it's not tangible doesn't make it any less real. Yeah. The way that you drive, if you're pissed off, the way that you drive is going to affect other people. Yeah. You can think of it like that. Like you're driving a car, and your car is your body. And if you approach your body from a place of stress and anger and frustration, then that is the vibration that you're literally putting out to the rest of the world. Hey, I'm stressed, I'm pissed, and there are people out there in this world that are going to take that really personally because they haven't even started looking at this kind of work to understand. Have that inner strength. Yeah, they don't have the inner strength. They don't have a cultured electromagnetic field that they've built and worked on. And if you're that type of person and you feel weak and you feel like you take things personally and you feel sensitive and maybe you think, oh, I'm an empath and I pick up on other people's stress and it makes me feel whatever, like that's still you not owning your own responsibility for how you feel. Yeah. You got to get that shit under control because you're not just hurting yourself. Everything we do has ramifications into everything else that we do and every relationship we have and everything. Our jobs, our home life, our parents, our children, into infinity. And the real goal of the yogi, of a true yogi, is to remove ourselves from the chain of cause and effect. And that isn't necessarily, people say like, oh, you achieve enlightenment and you don't have to be reincarnated, and they talk about all these sort of things that are very specific to like Hinduism. And that's not necessarily what we're talking about. What we're talking about is before I do an act, I think about how is this going to affect my future, the people around me, my job. You know, everything you do, every choice that you make has an effect. It's a ripple effect, and that's what the chain of cause and effect is. And as long as you are in a body and in this life, you are going to affect cause and effect.
Yeah,
you're part of
affect
it.
Things.
But how you approach life and your vibration and how you manage your own personal system and your own field will put that in your own control. And you put your attention on it, and then you have the ability to influence that in whatever way you choose to. And maybe some days it's not good. Maybe some days you're just like, yeah, screw the world, you know.
Yeah.
All these people are jerks. I still think that, and I've been practicing yoga for 20 years.
Yeah. And the thing about the just kind of a quick offshoot as well, because you mentioned earlier just kind of like the whole kind of sphere of politics and all of that stuff. Every person alive is only different from you because of perspective and because of experience. That's the only thing energetically that makes us different. In terms, there are other levels, biology, all different factors that, affect the experience. But that, if every person on the planet right now was to say, you are who you are because of your experience, and I know and feel and think what I do because of my experience, if we all saw each other that way, instead of seeing you as an ideal that you're coming forth with, or as an idea or a thought, because thoughts change in politics and in media and all of those things. People like to tell us that if people flip-flop or change at all, they're false.
Right.
They're fake, and it's the opposite.
Absolutely.
When you change, that means you're genuine. That means you're human. That means you adapt to things. You
Absolutely.
go, okay, here's something new. I'm not gonna, create cognitive dissonance and just throw it out because it doesn't align with my narrative. I'm gonna change and be like, yeah, that's true. That's a true thing. I'm gonna bring that into my toolbox. But if everyone was to see other people as just like another perspective from over there, then all we can give people is experience, is experiential knowledge, truly, genuinely. So if everyone did that, just be like, you're that experience, this is my experience. If that doesn't jive, that's okay, because it's still, everyone's going through a process. So even because no one is really right in that respect, because that goes into all different weird paradoxes and things. It's like, especially on an issue, it's really, you can find a middle ground, but no side, as long as it's a side, is ever going to be right. Because two people connecting can get to truth. Two people creating that middle way bridge, compromising things that they've known and experienced, or bringing new things in. No one's about that in the political world. No one's about that in that sphere, being like, whoa, I totally see your opinions over there. I'm going to consider them all. Mostly it's just like, I have a stance, and if you're against this stance, then we're in a fight. We're going to tussle. And that's, if you see people as experience, which is all people are, when you break it all down, they're just experience. They're just, internal and external. So you're like, your experience, I'm experience. Let's try and bring that together in some way. It doesn't have to be fucking perfect every time. Like, we can jive on one thing, and that's cool. It doesn't have to be everything. It doesn't have to be, you have to agree with me completely, Like, how's that even possible unless I walked in your shoes and, like, felt everything you felt and, like, seen everything you've seen, because that's where we come from. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah.
And we don't necessarily truly want everything to be the same, because that would become homogenous and boring and static, and it's counterintuitive to what life actually is, because life is diversity and change and growth and birth and death.
Yeah.
Life is in constant flux. Even this earth that we live on, the surface of the earth is constantly changing. And so to think that somehow ideas or organizations will be fixed is a dead mentality. It's a mentality of early death.
Yeah, that's a funny thing you say that, because it is dead.
Yeah.
You know?
And on that note, I would love to share with y'all an opportunity. If you are in Austin, or if you travel to Austin or have the opportunity to travel to Austin on May 20th here in Austin, it's Sukha Yoga, which is in South Austin. My personal mentor, my yogic mentor, Siri Bahadur Khalsa, and a very dear friend of his and mine, who is a very profound teacher. She does Shakti dance, prana dance. And her name is Dr. Deb Kern, and she also has a web presence, so you can easily find her. She does some online classes and has like a really nice website. They are coming together to work on this aspect of divine masculinity and divine femininity, and how to have, we have like battle of the sexes. This is divine unity of the sexes. How do we learn how to have that conversation of, hey, you are not ever going to be me, and I like that, because that means that I have someone who has a totally different worldview and a totally different experience from me, who can help inform and support my experience, and I in turn can do the same. And we're still fleshing out the title and the exact format, but if you are interested in this, it's going to be experiential, so there will be yoga, there will be meditation, movement, and it will also be sort of a forum style, where there will be an opportunity to have dialogue and discourse with someone of the opposite sex, and as a group kind of reach out to a sort of mutual understanding, because not just, there's so many things going on in our culture right now in America, between left and right politics, between male and female, and how we approach gender, how we approach even heterosexual relationship is in such turmoil right now. And then from there, like materialism and spiritualism, there are so many things that are, and really you can easily become stressed by all of these things that are so uncertain. And I know
immediately I get a response.
Yeah, and I know for older generations especially, because they lived in a different world. They lived in a world that, you didn't question gender roles.
Pretty cut and dry.
You didn't question, if your parents were Democrats, you were a Democrat. I mean, it's just the way it was. And now our world is so open and nebulous, and it's very exciting, but it's also a little bit scary. And so having an environment where you have a teacher or guide, you can be in a safe space and have safe dialogue and be able to be open and really explore these topics of like what it means. And we're not just talking about male and female. We're talking about divine masculinity and divine femininity, which are aspects that every single human has inside of them to a different degree. And we're really talking about polarities and how to live successfully and happy, healthy, and holy in this world of duality and multiplicity that we find ourselves in. Yeah. So check that out, May 20th, Sukha Yoga in South Austin. And to wrap it up, if you're okay with it, Sam, we will just do a very quick, very practical rundown of the techniques that we started with in the beginning of the podcast. So if you are watching, or if you're tuning in late, or if you're revisiting this podcast, you can start it from this point right now, and just follow the practical walkthrough of how to have an experience of embodiment in 5 minutes or less. So, yes. All right, great.
Awesome.
So Sam's going to be my model. Very handsome model.
Should I sit
and
this way, I guess?
Yeah. I'm going to sit sideways, so you can sit facing, and then we'll go through. So the first step is to always start at the base of the body. So sitting or standing, you can do this sitting in a chair, not ideal, but if you're someone who has to sit in a chair, make sure that your feet are flat on the floor, your knees are directly above your ankles, and sit, if you can, either on the edge of the chair, or at least make sure that your hips are able to be comfortable in a chair, so preferably like a straight seat. Some people, when they're sitting, like say I'm sitting right now, like to roll up a blanket and place that below their hips. If you have knee issues, you might like to elevate your hips above the knees just a bit. We got Zazen pillow. So the first thing you want to do is start feeling and developing a relationship between the base of the body. So you can rock forward and back and start to feel that balance point right in the middle. And what we're trying to do is feel an awareness of the perineum. Where's the perineum? That's the center of the base of the body. Good. And then we're going to rock side to side a little bit. Same thing. And if you're someone who has an ample glute, you might like to pull your butt cheeks apart a little bit. And we're really looking for that feeling. The perineum is a little piece of skin between the anus and sexual organs. And you want to have that pointed straight down towards the center of the earth. So the hips will end up slightly tucked, and the perineum points straight down. Good. Now we're going to start working with the 3-part breath. So you're going to inhale, and inhale as if you were inhaling all the way down into the sacrum. That's the first part. Then they'll bring the breath up and open the diaphragm and let that drop down and expand. And lastly, you'll expand into the lungs and the ribs 360 degrees. Let the shoulders open and start to drop back with the inhale. Exhale, release from the base. Feel the diaphragm start to contract, and then relax and release from the upper body. Good. Now, as we're breathing this 3-part breath, first into the lower belly, second into the diaphragm, and lastly expanding and opening across the chest, opening 360 the ribs, and letting the lungs expand. Imagine that you're putting a little bit of space between every vertebrae of the spine. And sitting up, supported and strong from the hips. See if you can feel where your shoulders are. Are your shoulders directly supported right above your hips? So again, that might take a little bit of adjusting. So as you're inhaling and exhaling with the 3-part breath, inhale into the base of the body. Feel it expand in the diaphragm. Now feel the upper body expand and gently lift the shoulders. And when you exhale, let them drop back and down and reset along the back. So the shoulder blade actually sits right on top of the ribs in the back. Good. Now tucking the chin slightly, about 30%. You don't want to hyperextend because that's going to cause strain in the neck. So just tuck the chin a little bit and start to feel with that breath. And remember, the first breath goes into the lower belly, second part of the breath goes into the mid-belly, expands the diaphragm, and the third part of the breath opens and expands the top of the body. Gently and sweetly expand. And now imagine you're putting a little space between every vertebrae in the back of the neck. And as you exhale, contract and compress in the lower belly. Feel the diaphragm compress and lift, and gently release in the chest, lungs, and shoulders. Good. And now imagine, as you're breathing, that there is a cord coming up right through the crown of the head, right through the top of the head, pulling ever so slightly towards the ceiling. So the chin is slightly tucked, back of the neck is expanded, gently lifting through the crown of the head. And as you're breathing, expanding from the base of the body, up into the mid-belly, and lastly into the chest, lungs, and shoulders. And every time you inhale, see if you can create a little bit of space in the breastplate right above where the heart, and opening all the way around 360 degrees, opening the back, opening the front of the chest, opening underneath the armpit. Feel that expansion. Good. And exhale and begin to release from the lower belly. Feel the diaphragm contract and relax, and gently release. Just sweetly let the breath waft out. Good. Now, continuing with the 3-part breath, take the eyes, and through the closed lids, focus the eyes at the 3rd eye point where the brows would meet. So your eyes are still closed, but your eyes are gazing crossways through where the brows would meet. So still breathing. And if you're not sure what to do with your hands, you can do like Sam's doing and gently rest on the knees. And in Kundalini, we really like to use the Jupiter mudra, which is the thumb and forefinger pressed together. Sam's got these first 2 fingers pressed slightly, which is also good. And you can either extend the fingers out, or you can kind of curl them together. It really doesn't matter too much. Some people like to keep their hands facing down. I prefer to keep my hands up, and then with the Jupiter mudra. So you're going to basically sit like this for 5 minutes. If you can do 5 minutes a day, every single day for 40 days, you will feel different almost instantly. Then you can start bumping it up to 10 minutes, and from there, you know, there are so many techniques and postures and resources that you can find. There's a plethora of different breathing patterns. They're called pranayama. I suggest mastering this 3-part yogic breath and the posture before you start getting into any of that stuff, because this is really so foundational, so pure, and so basic. And it will change your experience of yourself in your life practically overnight. So I hope you all enjoy. If you have questions, reach out to Sam or to me. Visit the podcast, check out the other episodes, because Sam has some great information up there. We have another podcast that we did together that's a bit longer and more on the intellectual esoteric side. You can also visit my website, Instant Practical Embodiment. Siri Bahader's website is siribahader.com. I don't have Dr. Deb Kern's website, but you can easily do a Google search for her. Her name's Deb Kern. And if you have any other questions about that, you can email me at chrysaliskate@gmail.com. We're also both on Instagram, so you can find us there. And I hope you enjoyed this experience.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Kate, as well, for coming on, sharing all that knowledge. Yeah, and if you want to know more, just look us both up. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'll definitely need subscriptions. Eventually want to make this into a thing that generates revenue. So yeah, subscribe. You know, reach out to us in any way you can. And it was a pleasure. Yeah, it was an honor to be a part of this. So yeah.
Well, thank you, Sam, and always a pleasure, and likewise an honor to work with you. And I'm so happy that you were doing all these things, and I'm happy for you. If you've joined us live, thank you so much. If you're watching after the fact, thank you so much. Anytime that you find information like this is the exact right time that you need it. So keep on the path, and Satnam.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. All right. Check us out next time.